What's this? A new 4-star card has been revealed for Rise of Shadows? Yeah, it has, but unfortunately you're going to have to wait a little bit on the review because this video is about Lackeys instead.
Hey buddy, watch this.
That's right, I want to go through and rank the new Lackey tokens that are being offered in Rise of Shadows. If you haven't seen these yet, they are like the new spare parts basically of the expansion, but they're minions instead of spells, and there will be a handful of different cards across different classes, and I think even a neutral card maybe that will generate these Lackey tokens, so they're going to be a significant part of Rise of Shadows and maybe even future expansions throughout the year as well, as has been teased. So I wanted to talk about which ones of these might be the best. Now, as it stands right now, may not matter because you're getting them randomly, but there might be other cards that help you discover a Lackey, and you might need to make choices here about which of these will be most significant or impactful. But beyond that, it's just fun too to think about which of these are going to have the biggest influence on games or might set up crazy combos, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and rank the 5 Lackeys so far. Up first here at the worst spot, in the number 5 spot, I have the Witchy Lackey. This is Hagatha's Lackey. And his battlecry reads, transform a friendly minion into one that costs 1 more. So we have this one-time use evolve effect. And as we've seen in Hearthstone, evolve can be pretty unreliable. Sometimes you just end up with something that's not all that exciting. So although this is an effect that's in a positive direction, I think it's far less consistent or reliable or predictable than some of the other Lackey opportunities that are out there. Another problem with the Witchy Lackey is that it is dependent on having a minion on board and a minion that you want to evolve, both of which might be challenging for a lot of different decks. So because of its reliance on other things, it doesn't have the same independence that some of the other Lackeys do, and the fact that it's so inconsistent, I think this one's going to rank at the bottom for me. Moving on to my number 4 spot here, I have the Faceless Lackey. This one summons a random 2-cost minion on its battle cry. And I think a lot of people look at this one and probably get excited about it because you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of stats for only a 1-mana minion that comes out of a token. And again, it's good. I think this is a really solid 1-mana token. Like, this is great. I think all the Lackeys are pretty solid. This one's good, but it's still not at the top of my list because I think in many cases you're going to either want your Lackeys to do one of two things, contribute a lot of value, as we'll see with our Lackey at the number 1 spot, or alternatively, create a lot of tempo. And although this summons minions, it's not reactive, immediately impactful tempo. And as we've seen with cards like Evil Miscreant, often you're going to be sacrificing some onboard stats and a little bit of tempo in order to generate your Lackeys. And I have to imagine other cards will be the same way. You're not just going to get them totally for free. There's going to be some sort of penalty to give you these cards. So whether that means casting a spell that generates you Lackeys or sacrificing stats on your minions or having the opportunity cost of not playing better things, all of that means you're going to be behind a bit on the board and on tempo. And a card like Faceless Lackey, although it generates a fair bit of stats, you sacrifice those stats in the first place. So you lack the immediacy or the sort of swing potential that some of our future Lackeys will have. So despite this one offering a ton of stats, I just don't think it's going to have that impact that's necessary for it to feel good in a lot of cases. And decks that would really value this effect of getting a couple minions on board, they probably aren't going to be running Lackey generating cards because a lot of the Lackey generating cards are going to come down later or sacrifice board in the first place. So it's just kind of at odds with itself. That to me, although it looks good in a vacuum, I think when you consider the context, leaves this card just a little bit wanting compared to the others. Although again, I still think it's pretty good. So moving on to our number 3 card here, I have the Goblin Lackey, and this one addresses some of the problems I brought up in the previous card because this card has immediate influence on the board thanks to the fact that it gives a minion rush, and it gets a little bit of the stat value back too thanks to that attack, and that attack even gets to be immediately utilized. So I think this one addresses some of those problems and probably fits in a little bit better with the kinds of decks that might want to use Goblin Lackeys, because even a deck that runs really big late game minions can still get value out of that rush, whereas they might not really care about a 2-mana minion that doesn't really change the game much. But, you know, if you give something giant rush and it can take a quick trade, that's often really, really good. So I don't think the +1 attack is going to be as impactful here as the rush aspect, but I think because this card offers you that way to influence the game directly and quickly, I think that's why it's going to feel a lot better in a lot of decks that are able to run Lackey style or Lackey generating cards in them. Moving on to my number 2 spot, the second best Lackey, I have the Kobold Lackey with a battle cry, deal 2 damage. And I really like this card because it's that miniature swing card. It can influence the game right away due to this 2 damage, and it can do it in a couple different ways. So, it can just chip away at a minion that's nice to set up executes, or just kill that knife juggler that's getting in your way while also developing a little bit of stats on board. And in a pinch, you know what? It can go face as well. So I think there are a lot of decks that are going to like this for the face damage potential. Like, that could help you end games or set up combos. A rogue in particular, I think, could really use a little minion that does 2 damage. I think there's a lot of ways to synergize with that. So this one's often going to feel really important to get. But even if there's not some like combo or lethal opportunity thanks to your Kobold Lackey, just that really good, cheap, easy deal 2 damage ping is influential in Hearthstone. We've seen so many cards that deal 2 damage that really matter. Think about like Merc Spark Eel, Fire Plume Phoenix. Those are solid cards in both constructed, but certainly in like Arena with Fire Plume Phoenix. But that 2 damage adds up. It means things. And getting it for 1 mana here on this body is really nice. That's just going to help you take little swings on the board, either as a control deck or sometimes as a mid-range deck. Even an aggro deck will care about this card. So across the board, I think the Kobold Lackey just feels good to play in a lot of different scenarios, and that's why it's going to be my number 2 spot. And then finally, moving on to the top spot, we have the Ethereal Lackey, discover a spell on its battle cry. And of course, this one's good because it just turns into a real card. And tokens are great, but they're not real cards. And the Ethereal Lackey can turn into some pretty incredible stuff. And you get a 1/1 body attached to it, which doesn't hurt. But the fact that you can turn this into a Pyroblast or a Flame Strike or a legendary spell, for heaven's sake, means that this one's going to be really exciting to see in your hand all the time. And the great thing is, all kinds of decks will appreciate this, right? Hunters would love to get an extra kill command sometimes. And the fact that you get to discover the spell and that it's not random is completely bonkers to me, because you get to pick something that fits your current needs or your game plan. It's not always going to be perfect, right? Because you still get a random selection, but most of the time you're going to control your fate here. And turning a token into a real card is amazing. Yeah, you're going to have to spend the mana on that card, of course, but it's just a resource generator. It's a lot of value. So whether it's an aggro deck, control deck, doesn't matter. People are going to want to find the Ethereal Lackey out of all these Lackeys. It's the one that's going to give you a lot of cool stuff to work with, and it will inevitably win a lot of games, top decking that damage or removal or ultimate value piece out of an Ethereal Lackey is going to be crazy. So I think this is far and away number 1. It's going to stand out above the rest, and people who get it are going to be very happy. People who see it played against them probably won't be quite so happy, but that's exactly why it's the number 1 card. And there you go. That wraps it up for the Lackey cards. Now, who really knows, of course, where these are going to land? It's going to vary by game. It's going to vary by meta. It's all going to feel just subjective on top of that. But this is my interpretation of how these cards are probably going to impact the game on average the most. Clearly, from game to game, it's going to change, but I think we can at least have some tendencies. And if there are cards out there that allow you to discover a Lackey or pick your choice, I think a video like this could help you maybe suss out which ones are going to be best on average. All that said, I'm curious what you guys think, though. You might have a totally different opinion and a different take on these Lackeys, and you know what? I can't wait to hear it, because I like learning from you guys. I'm not the only person here who knows things about Hearthstone. You guys have a lot of great insights too, so please share those in the comments below. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and until next time, game on.